Hello, my name is Austin Habish, the founder of Think Catholic, and you're listening to the Summa podcast, where we study St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae in a way simple and insightful for anyone to understand. The Summa podcast is brought to you by Think Catholic. Taking 2 questions of the Summa a day, we'll seek to summarize St. Thomas's responses, discovering the brilliance of Aquinas and his Catholic faith. This is day 145. And so let's get started. We're covering today questions 54 and 55 of the Secunda Secundae, that is, of negligence, and of vices opposed to prudence by way of resemblance. The translation that I always use in these podcasts is the one generously provided to me by Ave Maria Press, the 5-volume set translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican province, which you can now get at a discounted price from Ave Maria Press's site by typing in the code SUMMA10. And so here we go. Article 1, whether negligence is a special sin. Negligence is defined by St. Thomas as a lack of due solicitude, and solicitude was defined in day 141 as being shrewd and alert, insofar as a man through a certain shrewdness of mind is on the alert to do whatever has to be done. It is a distinct vice, since solicitude is a distinct virtue. It's a quasi-integral part of prudence, as we mentioned in a previous episode. Negligence isn't unique in the same way vices like lust would be unique by uniquely pointing to a particular sin. It is made unique by being a unique failure of reason, which then can extend to many specific moral failures, immoral actions. Article 2, whether negligence is opposed to prudence. It is directly opposed to prudence in that both prudence and negligence modify the act of command especially. The negligent man fails to command the due means. As summarized by Aquinas, a negligent man is one who fails to choose, and the right choice of the means belongs to prudence. Negligence regards the act of command. Yet differently than in the vice of inconstancy, which was our last episode, Aquinas continues, the inconstant man fails in commanding, being hindered, as it were, by something, whereas the negligent man fails through lack of a prompt will. Article 3, whether negligence can be a mortal sin. If negligence causes a man to not command something necessary for his salvation, like going to Mass, i.e. following the commandments or pursuing baptism, for example, then this negligence would be mortally sinful. But if it is negligence of works corresponding to a more perfect love, which one doesn't happen to have, the love required to pray more, for example, or fast more, or give alms more, the components of Matthew 6. This would not be mortally sinful, provided he does not act against charity. And now on to question 55 of vices opposed to prudence by way of resemblance. Article 1, whether prudence of the flesh is a sin. Prudence and its potential parts that modify counsel and judgment are about right reason in regard to the means. Therefore, prudence of the flesh, according to St. Thomas, is the prudence of a man who looks upon carnal goods as the last end of his life. So this man, the man of the flesh, is adept in discovering and executing the best means, but to a worldly end, some worldly beatitude, and this is evil because of the last end to which that pseudo-prudence is directed. Article 2, whether prudence of the flesh is a mortal sin. If it is prudence being informed by an intention, a heart set on temporal things as an ultimate end, then this prudence is mortally sinful, such as contrary to charity, which requires to love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength. But it may only be a venial sin if, as St. Thomas says, a man has an inordinate affection for some pleasure of the flesh without turning away from God by a mortal sin, in which case he does not place the end of his whole life in carnal pleasure. Article 3, whether craftiness is a special sin. Just as a man can fail in the speculative sphere by proceeding either from false principles or proceeding from true principles, but through other false premises, so too a man can proceed towards a false worldly end by what we've called a prudence of the flesh, or one can actually intend a good end but seek to reach it by evil means. This is what is called craftiness. In St. Thomas's words, a good end should not be pursued by means that are false and counterfeit, but such as are true. Hence, craftiness is a sin if it be directed to a good end. Article 4, whether guile is a sin pertaining to craftiness. Guile, according to Aquinas, is the execution of craftiness? His explanation is quite brief, so simply quoting him, he says, "The execution of craftiness with the purpose of deceiving is effected first and foremost by words, which hold the chief place among those signs whereby a man signifies something to another man. Hence guile is ascribed chiefly to speech. Yet guile may happen also in deeds, according to Psalm 104, and to deal deceitfully with his servants. Guile is also in the heart, according to Sirach chapter 19. His interior is full of deceit, but this is to devise deceits, according to Psalm 37. They studied deceits all the day long." Article 5, whether fraud pertains to craftiness. Fraud is a specific form of craftiness in form of deeds specifically and normally speaking denoting an unlawful taking or receiving things. Thus, as an illicit means to an end, it does pertain to craftiness. Article 6, whether it is lawful to be solicitous about temporal matters. Our Lord tells us, as recorded in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 6, and is translated from the Vulgate, "Be not solicitous, therefore, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or wherewith shall we be clothed?" So there is a kind of solicitude that is forbidden by our Lord. Solicitude is unlawful, according to St. Thomas, if it is a concern for temporal things because one has set his or her heart on the world. For 1 John says, "Do not love the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him." B, if a man desire too much or inordinately to procure temporal things which he should only care for as a means and trust that God will provide him with what he truly needs. Or C, if a man fear too much or inordinately to lose or to never attain certain temporal goods, because, again, God is provident. Article 7, whether we should be solicitous about the future. Beginning with our Lord again, he says in Matthew 6, "Be not therefore solicitous for tomorrow, for the morrow will be solicitous for itself. Sufficient for the day is the evil thereof." Then St. Thomas gives us a beautiful explanation to something surely we all struggle with. So, quoting him, he writes, "Every time has its own proper solicitude. Thus, solicitude about the crops belongs to the summertime, and solicitude about the vintage to the time of autumn. Accordingly, if a man were solicitous about the vintage during the summer, he would be needlessly forestalling the solicitude belonging to a future time. The morrow will have its own solicitude, which will be burden enough for the soul." This is what our Lord means by adding, "Sufficient for the day is the evil thereof," namely, the burden of solicitude. In other words, we should not be solicitous about tomorrow because we cannot bear the burden of 2 days in the one day, and because of all the reasons mentioned already regarding God's providence. Article 8, in our last article, whether these vices arise from covetousness. Much later on in the Summa, it will be said of covetousness that it is a desire not only for money, but also for knowledge in high places when prominence is immoderately sought after. Just as true prudence follows from farther upstream in the human act, the habit of justice, rendering unto another their due, both in regard to God and man, an evil prudence follows from coveting something contrary to this rule, the rule laid out by justice, contrary to the rule of reason. Men are induced to act craftily, or with guile, or fraudulently, or with unduly solicitousness, because one covets something which they ought to hold with detachment of heart. In general, detachment of heart from the world is a general safe thing to do, to always pursue, because it is through the love of non-God things that we are snared into all kinds of temptations, to say and to act in all kinds of ways in order to possess or to keep from not losing some temporal good. As St. James says, "But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death." So we have to stop at the root of our problems here, which is covetousness, this disordered desire. Aquinas writes here, "The undue use of reason appears chiefly in the vices opposed to justice, the chief of which is covetousness. Therefore, the aforesaid vices arise chiefly from covetousness. And with that, we come to the close of another episode. We have just finished covering questions 54 and 55 of the secundae, that is, of negligence, and of vice as opposed to prudence by way of resemblance. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow.